When the door was firmly shut, we all stood around waiting to see if anything else was going to happen. After a few seconds, Nubby cheerily announced that went all right, clumped over to the lift control panel, and pressed the new button before anyone could think to stop him. All of us swore at the little trooper as the lift launched upwards like a booster rocket had been attached to it, and a sensation disturbingly similar to a bad warp transit rolled over us. It took us about 8 seconds for the lift to reach level 39. This was, admittedly, a great improvement over its usual speed, but that didn't quite make up for the general unpleasantness of the ascent, and the way we were all launched a meter into the air when it slammed to a stop. We staggered to our feet, attempted to look around, and realized that we were somehow unable to direct our gaze at anything but the floor and the wall at the front of the lift, which held yet another door that didn't belong in a lift shaft. Nubby scampered towards the lift control panel again, only to find himself suspended in the air by his collar. Sarge handed him to Amy, walked over to the panel, and briefly perused the options before giving up and just hitting the open door button. It slid open to reveal a short, unlit hallway that was just large enough for the pallet, and another door. Lacking any better ideas, we entered the hallway, and were totally unsurprised when the door slammed shut behind us. What did surprise us was the words "outer airlock door, for real this time," stenciled on the inside. Tink spoke for all of us when he suggested getting through the inner door as fast as possible. On the far side of the door, we found a bunk room full of confused crewmen. When asked, they confirmed that we were indeed on level 39 and only a short distance away from the main lift. Sarge reported our position to the Cogitator Adept, who presumably relayed it to everyone else while we resumed our journey to the Astropathic Sanctum. Our pace was much slower than it had been before, partially because we didn't have a pre-mapped route anymore, but mostly because there were no ghost nids up there to attack us. Also, it seemed like Theo had done a great job of repairing the psi suppressors. They were nearly silent, and nothing weird was happening at all. We practically strolled through bays and corridors, congratulating ourselves and praising the generosity of overcooked skeletons as we walked. This light mood lasted until we reached the entrance to the main lift. As the door opened to reveal the lift shaft, the tendrils of smoke drifting from the Demonthrope's wings suddenly snaked around and shot downwards. 13 levels below us, the tendrils pooled against the roof of the shrine that had been built over the Cogden's crater, and then melted through it in a burst of black and green light. A screeching that sounded like a cross between binary, Tyranid, and demonic echoed up the shaft, and everything very abruptly went to shit. The psi suppressors began making an overloaded whine, and the two that Theo had just repaired exploded. Fragments of metal and crystal bounced off our carapace armor and Spot's tau metal chassis, but Theo and the delicate machinery on the pallet weren't anywhere near as protected. The little Xenos received several nasty gashes on his face and arms. 2 more suppressors began spewing clouds of smoke, and the stasis unit began emitting a steadily rising whine that was horribly familiar to us. Down in the shaft, several things that sounded bigger and warpier than any ghost nid we'd encountered began to howl. Now, despite occasional bouts of irrationality and insanity, we were a bunch of semi-professional badasses, so we didn't just stand around panicking over how screwed we were. Within 5 seconds of the suppression failure, we had 4 guns pouring pulse fire into the indistinct forms crawling up the lift shaft, and Doc and Tink were seeing to Theo and the damaged pallet. Doc immediately diagnosed Theo's injuries as non-life-threatening, administered a few bandages and Tau-safe painkillers, and then steered the little Xenos over to where Tink was doing his best to keep anything else from exploding. The top priority was the stasis unit, which was making the telltale sound of an imminent flicker. Given that this unit didn't have an array of grav plates to keep anything inside it from escaping, Tink was operating under the assumption that any flicker over a second long would result in an enraged Xenos demon host flying into the air and tearing us all to bloody pieces. He and Theo, who was badly shaken but still able to help, set to work stabilizing, splicing, and other technical shit, while Doc ran over to join the rest of us in our delightful game of shoot the horrible monster before it closes to melee range and kills you. Horrible monster was really the best description we could come up with for what was climbing the shaft around the rising lift platform. By the time Doc had arrived, we'd killed at least 6 of them between us, that's 3 for Amy, the show-off, and 1 for everyone else. But we still had no idea what the hell the things were. We could see Tyranid chitin claws, but they were mixed in with tentacles and massive bulging eyes, and the whole mess seemed to be covered with clouds of obscuring smoke. Twitch piped up triumphantly, declaring them to be his long-predicted demonids. None of us bothered to argue with him. Unlike most of our battles with the ghost nids, our defense of the level 39 lift door, not a battle name for the history books that, wasn't a cakewalk. Whatever the things climbing up the shaft were, they could take an awful lot of fire, and they moved far faster than anything their size had the right to. We operated as efficiently as possible, calling targets, maintaining fire discipline, and making heavy use of Spot's marker thingy, but they steadily gained ground on us, especially where the rising lift platform, a half-shaft wall crawler, picture a metal rectangle with massive gears on 3 sides, blocked our line of sight. To make matters worse, the Demonthrope was acting all sorts of uppity. Tink and Theo managed to prevent a stasis flicker, thank the Emperor, but the damned bug was still able to inflict all sorts of inconvenient minor phenomena on us, and we could feel it trying to worm its way into our minds. Presumably, it was trying to command us to do its bidding, but unlike the demons we'd heard about from other inquisitorial agents, this thing apparently only knew how to speak in binary and Tyranid. So it was mostly just incoherent psychic screeching, but it was still very distracting, and left us all with massive headaches, plus a vague hunger for human flesh and motor oil. So it was pretty obvious to all of us that our situation wasn't sustainable. But luckily, it didn't have to be. We really only had to hold out long enough for the lift to reach us, and for us to ride it up to the bridge level, where it was a short sprint to the former astropathic sanctum. Not an easy task by any means, but one that was definitely possible. Well, at least we hoped it was possible, because the only other option was setting off the failsafe Twitch had wired to the Demonthrope's stasis unit, and it would really suck if we wound up just killing the thing after hauling it halfway across the galaxy. It took an absolutely grueling 3 minutes for the lift to clank its way up to us, but we managed to hold off the demonids, or whatever, until it reached us. We piled aboard and switched to a much less efficient omnidirectional defense of the edges of the platform, which we immediately realized was not going to be enough to keep them from catching us before we reached the bridge. Not liking the idea of fighting 3-meter-tall monsters as they climbed over the edge of the platform and directly into melee range, Sarge ordered the deployment of our remaining grenades and as many of Twitch's det packs as he could use without collapsing a wall. The wave of explosions that rolled down the shaft was like a miniature artillery barrage. It was immensely satisfying to watch bug after bug being knocked off the walls to plummet to the bottom of the shaft. The distant sound of their enraged howls, ending in gooey, cracking crashes, warmed our hearts, but not as much as what we saw when the smoke cleared. The massed concussive force and the impacts of their falling companions had dislodged almost every one of the climbing demonids. We began picking off the last stragglers, and for a few seconds actually thought we'd bought enough time to reach our destination unmolested. Then the tendrils of smoke drifting down from the demon thrope twisted into a giant pile of ichor and limbs at the bottom of the shaft, and something freaking massive pulled itself together. It rose out of the goo, turned a horned head towards us, and spread wings that touched the edges of the shaft. The 5 of us, looking over the edge, swore, as what looked for all the world like a winged hive tyrant with extra eyes and tentacles launched itself upwards. We all immediately opened fire on full auto, just indiscriminately hosing the demonic flyrant with as much pulse fire as possible, which accomplished very little aside from making it angry. It was hard to tell whether the thing was shrugging off our fire or regenerating its injuries, but the end result was the same. So Sarge quickly ordered a change of tactics. Tink ran over and joined us, nailing the flyrant with big old balls of armor-piercing plasma, while the rest of us focused our fire on Spot's marker light. Our target was the hot thing's wings. Specifically, the joint where the left one connected to its shoulder, which we figured would be a rather delicate and vulnerable spot in the flyrant's armor. This proved true. Unfortunately, the result when we finally burned through was disappointing. The wing did shear off and drop down the shaft, but the flyrant didn't follow it down. The Demonthrope's smoky tendrils coalesced around the bloody joint and then sprang out to form a new wing before the beast had fallen more than a meter. With what was unquestionably a laugh, the flyrant resumed its flight. We were understandably frustrated by this development, but not defeated. We shot the smoky wing a little just to see if that would work, and when it didn't, we shifted our fire to the other wing, mostly out of stubbornness. Once that wing had reformed out of smoke too, and the flyrant had let out another horrible demonic laugh, we began directing our fire at the little we could see of its head. Well, most of us did. Nubby and Twitch decided that the Emperor could worry about the structural integrity of the lift shaft, and began unloading the Demolitions Trooper's pack. The first det pack pegged the flyrant on the tip of its pointy head, and knocked it half a meter downwards when it detonated, but it didn't do much more than blacken and crack the thing's chitinous armor. Before those cracks could heal, though, a second pack exploded in the air just behind it, damaging it further and temporarily disrupting the solidity of its wings. Now, if Twitch hadn't been running low on munitions, it sounds impossible, I know, but several weeks of constant fighting was enough to run down even his stockpiles. This renewed explosive assault might have been enough to stop the flyrant. Unfortunately, he and Nubby ran out of det packs far before the giant demonic bug ran out of whatever was keeping it alive. That didn't mean Twitch was out of explosives, though, just ones that could easily be used against a moving target. When the flyrant came through the 9th det pack explosion looking as pissed as ever, he instructed Nubby to grab a few parts from Tink or Theo and began messing with the mixed assortment of mines he had left. Of course, the rest of us weren't just standing around while this went on. We kept putting fire into the Flyrant's head and shoulders. We just had no idea if it was actually accomplishing anything. By our reckoning, we'd done far more damage than it had taken to kill the non-demonic Flyrant that had bisected Sergeant Gravis, but even the gaping holes left by Tink's weapons seemed to be filling in almost as fast as we inflicted them. Nubby quickly acquired the parts Twitch wanted, and then ran around collecting everyone's leftover flash and smoke grenades. Mind you, he didn't bother to ask us for them. The little klepto just sort of drifted by like a rancid breeze and they were gone. Anyway, everything, even vaguely explosive, was loaded into Twitch's pack. The makeshift detonator was rigged, and the improvised bomb was placed at the edge of the lift, where Tink threw a sizable wrench into the plan by refusing to attach it to Spot.